Another thing that people have taken as a given that seems to be, like, could possibly be a complete fabrication. It might be another offshoot of this Mason's plan to just siphon off a bunch of money from the space program, but also siphon a bunch of money from the nuclear weapons program, because it seems like, and this was only brought to my attention through you and your post about it and the footage that you've shown, it seems like at least the test footage that we've seen of a lot of nuclear weapons from back in the day when they're telling our parents to duck and cover under their school desk to protect them from a nuclear blast, and you got the air raid sirens going off. Obviously, our entire culture was completely paralyzed by the idea of nuclear weapons. But when you're looking at the test footage, given back then it might not have looked fake. You know, back then they actually thought King Kong looked real in the movie, or Jaws looked real in the movie, but now we can see it's clearly fake. When you look back at that footage, it's oftentimes, it looks like the scale of, say, a subdivision where you're in an empty lot across the street aiming a camera at a farmhouse on the other side of the street, a lot over, and then the blast hits and the farmhouse just gets destroyed. The house just gets ripped apart. But what happened to the camera? You know, who's filming that? The camera is only a couple 100 feet away from that. And in some videos, man, this is the most compelling, is the blast comes from behind the camera. What the hell is that? The blast comes from behind the camera and the house gets blown away out into the background of the shot. And you're like, what kind of camera in that day and age could survive that blast, but an entire building can't? I mean, it seems way out there. You've changed my mind on a little of this. You dipped my needle further into the fringe for sure.
Yeah. So it's just another way to get us scared into giving them more money. So we're giving them hundreds of billions of dollars in this space race that America and Russia were doing, and they also did the Cold War. So they scared us into this nuclear scare, and then stole a bunch more money to build fake nuclear weapons. And so, yeah, nuclear weapons don't exist as such. The tests that you've seen, the very early ones, like you were talking about, are clearly fake, just done on models. Some of the later tests were done using stacked dynamite. You just get a shitload of dynamite and blow it all up, and it makes the mushroom cloud, does the whole thing. And what they do is they'd tell one team that, you know, they'd have a bunch of people 20 miles away, say army guys watching, doing the test, and then you've got over on one island these people stacking dynamite, saying that we're doing this for comparative purposes, and the real nuke's going to be over on that island. Meanwhile, they got another team over on that island stacking dynamite for comparative purposes, and the real nuke's going to be on the other island. So they even have military men stacking dynamite that they know is being used for these supposed nuclear explosions, but they believe that they've seen a real nuke, even though they tell them to cover your eyes and put your head in your laps as it happens. You don't see anything until the smoke clears afterwards. But yeah, a lot of military men will swear, you know, up and down that nukes must exist because they were there at some of those tests, and it's just dynamite. They do it beneath water by stacking dynamite in submarines, and you can do it up in the air as well. The Hiroshima and Nagasaki nukes, you can see that they're clearly two superimposed explosions, one on top of each other. There's two smoke plumes made to look like they're one. They actually used this technique several times.
Now take a look at this. It's footage of the first H-bomb test called Ivy Mike. Watch how it changes. That's a composite. Then it morphs into this. It looks like a completely separate explosion. Now take a look at the frame before the explosion, and then the one after. These frames were cut together. Why? Then this frame was cut to this, which looks like the sun to me. It looks like they're zooming in on the sun. Maybe a composite because the clouds aren't moving. Then they introduced some sort of liquid. It looks like a laboratory concoction in composite with the sun. Next is Operation Dominic Fireballs in the Yukon. What does that look like to you? Watch it again. It's the sun. Now here's Operation Greenhouse. These guys are getting all ready to see what looks to be the sun again. The sun seems to start to expand. Maybe it's being zoomed in on. There's no question that the powers that be have ballistics with tremendous explosive capacity. But this shot, for example, could easily be high-volume dynamite. And what are we looking at here? Take a look at this house again. Whatever was strong enough to blow it to smithereens wasn't strong enough to even shake the camera. And look how high up the camera position is. Are we looking at another model? Now look at this bus and this car. Whatever's blowing them up is not moving the camera. And this building seems to blow up from the inside. Everything gets blown every which way except for the camera.
The trick relies on encouraging people to believe a big explosion is a massive one. With eyewitnesses, this is achieved through distance. From a distance, it is difficult to know how big an explosion is. Most will accept it as being as big as they are told it is. It was very big after all. The trick also relies on people's propensity to exaggerate when recalling experience. It would have been the biggest explosion any of them had ever seen, and so they are likely to tell anyone who asks that it was big, in fact very big. They are unlikely to play it down and say, well, it wasn't all that big actually. For many of them it would have been the most interesting thing that had ever happened in their lives, and so they would tend to big it up.
In order to accurately calibrate the instrumentation for the test, another test, one using only high explosives, was needed. A dress rehearsal of 100 tons of TNT was planned for. Hundreds of crates of high explosives were stacked on the platform of a 20-foot tower. Tubes of low-level nuclear material were scattered throughout the explosives to simulate the radioactive products of a nuclear blast. Everything was set to a scale to match the expected effects of the nuclear test shot. On May 7th, the high explosive was detonated. The orange fireball was seen 60 miles away.
How big is this explosion? How big you perceive it to be depends very much on how far you think it is away and what you have to compare it to. The myth of the blinding light that supposedly makes nuclear bombs distinct from conventional ones is achieved using floodlighting and possibly mirrors, and possibly through the burning of elements such as magnesium within the explosion itself. It is often illustrated to the public with shots of extreme shadowing, which can easily be created in a studio. Most witnesses will never actually see the supposed blinding light, as they were usually told to close and cover their eyes, and often to turn their backs. Often the illusion was reinforced with protective goggles and clothing. The footage is generally put together using footage of smaller explosions, without anything in shot to provide size comparison, mixed with footage of the sun, sunsets, and clouds filmed using time-lapse photography. There is little or no unedited footage provided to the public. Almost all of the footage has cuts, and often cuts away to shots of observers, or shots illustrating the supposed destructive force, and back again to the footage of the developing aftermath of the explosion, and then away again and back again. And so the public rarely sees a so-called nuclear explosion complete in one continuous sequence. Mushroom clouds are not unique to so-called nuclear explosions. The illusion of nuclear weapons was also manufactured with the use of very large conventional bombs, fuel air bombs or thermobaric or vacuum bombs. Up close and from a distance they could easily be mistaken for mythical, much larger so-called nuclear bombs.
But it was one unique conventional bomb that was the climax of high explosives in Vietnam. Called called Big Blue 82. It was a blockbuster that caused injuries for miles. At 15,000 pounds, a single bomb was the entire cargo for the journey into hostile airspace. Delivered from the hold of a C-130 cargo plane, the bomb was slowed by a parachute and drifted to its target. When it exploded, the crater was enormous and the destruction total.
You're about to witness the mother of all bombs. The massive Ordnance Air Blast Bomb, or MOAB, 10 tons of H6 explosive.
When they were testing it, people actually thought they were testing small-scale nuclear devices.
Plus, the psychological effect of the nuclear-style mushroom cloud is undeniable.
Good job.
Russian military has announced the testing of a vacuum explosive device that unleashes a shockwave with the power of a nuclear weapon, according to Russian scientists. U.S. forces have used a thermobaric bomb, which works on similar principles, in their campaign against al-Qaeda and Taliban forces.